So our first presenter we have is Olive Lynch. What's great about Olive, she has a very eclectic background. Everything from being an opera singer, I kid you not, this is not what the moonshot's about, but she also has 10 plus years of consulting and IT banking experience, which is really great, and degrees from both Johns Hopkins and from the Curtis Institute of Music. Olive, is that correct? So I would love to have her for Trivial Pursuit as my partner, because wide range, but we're proud to have her, and also she's owned and managed a horse farm for 10 years, which will kind of bring her to her moonshot. So Olive, thank you for your time, and we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Food waste is like the last pioneer, the last thing of how do you solve this. What was interesting when I started the research on this is where the food waste is happening. Here in developed countries, the food waste happens on the consumer side. Half of the food waste happens in our homes residentially. About 15% of the food waste that's in landfills comes from restaurants because there's a tremendous amount of waste there. Most restaurants, their garbage is between 60 to sometimes 100% food waste. The other problem that we're solving is the issue of food production, and namely fish is the focus. Fish is one of the most efficient ways to convert protein into human protein. The problem that's happening right now is that we are fishing our oceans, and because of the demand for farmed fish is so great, and most of these fish are carnivores. They don't really take readily to being fed corn and soybean and algae. Right now there's a lot of research trying to produce feeds for these animals, but really they're not evolved for it. And so we come to what my moonshot is. And let me see that I switch it here, sorry. Black soldier flies. Black soldier flies are a species of fly that occur around the world. They're unique in that they're not the fly that you see in your house flying around bugging you. The adults only live for 5 days and they don't have a mouth. Because of this biology, what happens is that the larva or their maggot grows tremendously and is an eating machine. They eat twice their weight a day. They have a rasping mouth, and they basically, you put something in front of them, they're going to eat it. The other thing is that the composition of their body, they have a great deal of oil, they have a great deal of protein, and there have been studies already done by the USDA that trout-fed black soldier fly larvae fed on manure, you could not tell the taste difference, or the growth rate was not that much different between those trout being fed fish meal. So it really is a breakthrough that potentially you could take something that we're chucking away, losing the value of it, turn it into a protein that then can go back into the food stream. My company started in 2011, and the process was, the focus of what I wanted to do is to have a process that would be low cost. There are other companies that are pursuing this right now around the world. I think there's about 7, and they're all at different stages. It's still an emerging technology. No one has solved the problem completely yet. The other companies are focused on pre-consumer waste, which is, they're going after the big waste producers, factory that are processing food, food that's very homogeneous. My choice was to go with food waste because I felt it was a more thorny problem to solve. And the difference is, instead of having a facility in one spot where you get tons of the same stuff, you're picking up from everywhere. Obviously, like picking up from homes, picking up from restaurants. I also wanted to design a solution that would be cheap, because the other companies are all building automated systems, things that are going to cost millions of dollars once they deploy. My design is basically $1,000 for about an 8x8 area that will process a ton a day of food waste. So my goal for this is that by doing this, that you could have, instead of one huge monster spot where you're bringing in, 500 tons a day of food waste, and believe me, when you bring a lot of food waste together, it starts smelling just because the food has rotted in its different stages. It makes much more sense to have smaller local areas where the food waste can be processed where the food waste is happening. So you now reduce your transportation costs, And because the volume of the food waste isn't so large, you don't have the smell problem that you have with the big facilities. Here on the East Coast, we have right now 2 food waste recyclers. One is down in Delaware, and they use composting, and then the other one in New Jersey is a small composting facility, and that's it. That's it for the local area. There's I believe another one up in New York State. So there's a big demand for someone to take food waste, but there aren't that many places where you can take it, and part of it is the cost. The ways to recycle food waste right now are composting and biodigesters. They both have their problems. Composting takes a lot of land, and the actual income from the compost does not really offset the costs. It's a very marginal business. And the same thing with anaerobic digesters. They seem like they're a great solution, but it's a very specific bacteria that eats the food waste. And if you don't get the mix right, if the particle size isn't right, the vat will stop producing, and then you're left with a mess. And there was actually a company called Converted Organics that was very near here that failed and stunk up the whole neighborhood because of that. So my goal with our process is that we were starting small, and we were going to run pilots to basically test out how they ate, look at the conversion rates, all that kind of stuff. So where the company is, we actually started in an old Mack truck. Oh, did I get it? Okay.
Sorry, we got it free.
I don't know what's happening here. Good. Take it to the next slide, sorry. Oops. Okay, I'll just keep going. We started in an old Mack truck building. It was in the middle of a town called Plainfield, surrounded by homes. And the part of the test was to see, would this be stinky? Would it be something that would cause a problem? And the answer was no. We also did pilots with Sustainable Morristown. We did a pilot with the Jersey City SID. And we also ran a pilot in the town of Dunellen and the town of Woodbridge. And the twist there is we used horses to pick up the food waste. And the reason for that is that I cost out, part of the problem with picking up food waste residentially is the cost of running the trucks. The trucks cost about, if you're going to run a big garbage truck, they cost $100 an hour to run. And a team of horses with 2 people on it costs about $45 an hour to run. And you can cover the same amount of territory because we think about a truck stop, start, the horses can do the same thing. So we basically ran that test, and it worked beautifully, and of course everybody loved it. And the participation rate in the pilot was 100%. The food waste was very clean, which is an important thing if you're going to be recycling food waste. So the final thing is, what is the vision? The vision is to have a way to recycle food waste and produce protein in a very small footprint in urban areas where the food waste happens, so you reduce your transportation costs. I envision eventually doing public-private partnerships. The part that I glossed over very quickly was that the value of the protein coming out of a ton of food waste is about $250. Right now in New Jersey, the cost to get rid of garbage, just garbage, runs between $70 to $110 a ton. So the idea is that eventually when this technology matures, then you could have towns actually making money from their garbage by doing that. And of course, then you have all the things that you're producing a sustainable protein for food production. And also the idea of doing a process that is manual instead of automated, you're providing jobs. So that's it. It actually can work in all parts of the U.S. The flies occur across the world, but obviously they do their breeding in warm temperatures. So the mitigation of that is that that's why we did it inside, where we could keep them warm, we'd keep them from getting too hot. One of the things out of our testing is that we're going to combine this with a type of composting bore system and pull the heat off of the heap from the composting, and then use that to help keep the flies warm for the breeding. The larvae themselves produce a ton of heat. In the design that I have, we actually have to vent it because the heat gets so hot from their activity. Literally, it it can heat an area, especially if you have long stacks of them, they'll keep the area warm. So there's efficiencies, and of course that's part of what we're working on with our R&D. So yeah, it works. The biggest issue that I think is really facing everybody is there are still issues with understanding them as a species, keeping them, a large amount of them, in one area. The diseases that they're susceptible to, you can have colony collapses. For some reason, the flies won't breed. I mean, there's still a lot of research in the science, so that's why we really are still in an R&D mode, even though we've had successful cycles of breeding and processing them. The other thing we found is that with the characterization of the food waste coming from different sources, is different. Food waste from residences has a lot more meat in it, which the larva will eat, where if it comes from a restaurant, it tends to be more bread, more fruits and vegetables, leavings that have a lot of cellulose. And the larva can't eat cellulose. Like if you give them a lettuce leaf, they'll eat all the soft bits and leave the tracery. But what's really cool, if you throw a can in there with filled with say a tuna fish can with stuff in it, they clean it out like it's been washed. They crawl in there and just eat it, so they're very, very voracious, and they smell the food, and that's what attracts them. They don't have eyes when they're grubs. So that was part of it. It was showing that it can work everywhere. There's 2 facilities now, one up in Canada and one in Ohio, and they have tough winters. Yeah.
I understand the collection of the food waste and taking it to the small centers to process. I didn't hear a lot, I don't think, on the protein that's created and how that then is efficiently transported back to the marketplace, or who buys that, or tell me a little more about the protein side of this business model.
Right. What I'm envisioning is that the breeding of the flies is the tough part. Feeding the food waste to the larva is very easy. So what I envision is you have a central hub where the processing of the larva into the protein and the breeding of the flies would happen, and then you'd have your satellite areas where the actual feeding of the food waste to the larva could happen, because when they hatch out, they're teeny tiny, so they're very easy to ship. They're very tolerant to cold. Heat is the biggest issue with them. The processing of them into protein, actually, you can cold press them, you can cook them. It's basically like any meat rendering that happens here in the United States. And in fact, what part of getting prepared for that portion, I was talking to actual rendering plants to use smaller equipment that people didn't want anymore to do that. Cooking it down, you extract the oil out, you put it in a centrifuge. So what you end up with is a dry cake of the actual protein, and then the oil is separate, which, by the way, the oil actually has been tested. It can be used for biofuel out of their bodies. So, but it might have more value as a nutrition additive. The other thing with the larvae that's really interesting, whatever you feed them, that's what their body's made up of. So if you give them a ton of bread, they're going to have a lot more calcium in them, giving them grains. Where if you fed them nothing but fish guts, then they'd have all the omegas in their body that came out of the fish. So you can almost design a type of feed based on what you feed them, or the source of your food waste.
So I was thinking about the source of the food waste and how we're kind of used to getting recycling picked up. In my town, it's every other week. Do you foresee any issues with going to scale on that end? You can't collect every day.
No, what I think will happen is we ran pilots with some commercial restaurants and some people like that, and what we found by working with them in our pilot is that they could reduce their actual garbage. Like once you take out the cans and the cardboard, those can be collected twice a month. If you pick the food waste up twice a week, it doesn't get too smelly, and then the other garbage can be picked up once a month because it doesn't smell. I mean, what's in our garbage is the food waste. And actually, that's one of the issues with garbage trucks, is garbage trucks were designed to, when they squish down, the expectation is that you would have things like cardboard and paper that would absorb the liquids from the food waste. So that's why garbage trucks are not a solution for picking up just food waste, because when you squish it, all that liquid comes out and it's a stinky mess. Our solution is we gave companies a 32-gallon brute container, and they put their food waste in there. And we actually ran a test. You could leave food waste in there for a month. In the middle of summer, we did this, and you can't smell it. Because once that lid's on there, it goes anaerobic and you don't smell it. But of course, we were picking up twice a week, and usually the worst things that came out of it was that we found mice in there, that would get in there somehow.
Next question.
So I have like 46 questions. I'll keep it to one simple one. So what happens when the larvae mature?
That's when you harvest them. The whole life cycle is like any insect. They get laid as eggs. If you give them perfect conditions, in 2 weeks they're fully grown. They're almost an inch long. And at that point, that's when you harvest them and turn them into the food. When you're to scale, probably you can keep 10% to the side for your breeding stock. And I envision eventually you'd want to bring in wild genetics to keep your genetics up and running, because it's going to be a closed system. But basically.
So a follow-up. Sorry, 1.5 questions. So so you're harvesting the larvae, and then are they also producing waste?
Yeah, that's what the compost in this, I don't know if you can see the slide, they do produce a poop. And what they do is that the food waste you give them, if there's a lot of cellulose, the poop mixes with that and they churn. Like their whole thing is like, if you look at a heap of it, it's that kind of horror movie if you see everything moving around. Well, they churn it around and it turns black. And actually you end up with a really high quality compost. What we were figuring the next step is that we would take that and then put that in a standard composting system, like a standard like heap system, and then it would get cooked to the degrees that you need for composting. The other reason for using the
Oh, okay, all right.
Good.
Thank you. Please give her a hand.
Okay, sorry. All right.